the woman history remembers as the Blood Countess, Elizabeth Báthory de Exed, was born on August 7, 1560, in Nyírbátor, in the eastern reaches of the Kingdom of Hungary. Her birth was not remarkable for its timing, but for the weight of her ancestry. Elizabeth was the daughter of Baron George VI Báthory, of the Exed branch of the Báthory family, and Baroness Anna Báthory of the Somlyo branch, cousins in blood, united to consolidate wealth, power, and influence. The Báthorys traced their lineage back to 1310, and the family name itself translated to Good Hero, a nod to a legendary ancestor named Vitus, who, according to myth, slew a rampaging dragon in the year 900. The tale, embroidered with heroism and gore, echoed through generations, shaping the family's sense of destiny and perhaps foreshadowing the darker stories yet to come. Elizabeth's childhood unfolded at Exed Castle, now Nagy Exed, in the northern Great Plain, near modern Romania. The castle's high walls and stone towers sheltered her, yet they could not shield her from the harsh realities of 16th century nobility. She was raised Calvinist in a region where the Catholic Church still wielded enormous influence, and from an early age, she received an education worthy of her class. Elizabeth mastered Latin, German, Hungarian, and Greek, displaying a sharp intellect and a forceful will that distinguished her from many of her peers. She read, wrote, and studied music and philosophy, absorbing knowledge that would later make her an influential manager of vast estates. Yet alongside intelligence, Elizabeth carried a burden of frailty. She suffered seizures and frequent headaches, likely caused by epilepsy, a condition poorly understood at the time. Renaissance medicine had begun exploring physical causes of such afflictions, but superstition and fear dominated most interpretations. Epilepsy was often viewed as a sign of moral weakness, divine punishment, or madness. In the corridors of Exed Castle, Elizabeth learned to conceal her weakness, her family preferring to hush over what they did not, or could not, fully understand. Life in Renaissance Hungary was one of contradictions. Elizabeth learned the new ideals of education, religion, and refinement, yet she was daily exposed to remnants of medieval brutality. Nobles, servants, and peasants lived under a social order defined by sharp hierarchies and violent retribution. Whippings were routine. Petty theft could cost a limb. Accusations of witchcraft could end in immolation or drowning. Even those charged with treason suffered inventive tortures designed to inflict maximum pain before death. In 1514, a mere decades before Elizabeth's birth, a peasant revolt led by Gheorghe Dosa had been crushed in horrifying fashion. Dosa himself was made to sit upon a burning throne, while his brother was dismembered before his eyes, and eventually his flesh was eaten in a grim demonstration of power. Tales such as these were not distant stories. They were part of the fabric of Elizabeth's early environment, informing her understanding of power, obedience, and cruelty. Her upbringing occurred against a backdrop of geopolitical turmoil. The Kingdom of Hungary had suffered devastating defeats against the Ottoman Empire, culminating in the catastrophic Battle of Mohács in 1526. King Ulászló II fell in battle, and the kingdom was partitioned into 3 regions. Habsburg-controlled Royal Hungary in the west, Ottoman-occupied central and southern territories, and the semi-independent Principality of Transylvania in the east, where Elizabeth would grow up. Power in this fractured land was precarious. Local nobles, including the Báthorys, constantly navigated shifting alliances with the Habsburgs, the Ottomans, and their own kin. Elizabeth's maternal uncle, Stefan Báthory, became King of Poland in 1575, while her paternal uncle, Andrew Bonaventura Báthory, rose to prominence in Transylvania. Elizabeth's family wielded influence across Central and Eastern Europe, lending them wealth, land, and dangerous political weight. Within Exed Castle, Elizabeth observed and participated in the complex interplay of status, violence, and gender. Noble households maintained strict hierarchies where power over servants was absolute, and punishment for disobedience could be severe. Yet alongside this cruelty, Elizabeth's childhood was marked by cultural refinement. She studied music and literature, learned the skills necessary to manage a grand household, and absorbed the expectations of nobility, diplomacy, intellect, and public decorum. She was trained to be both feared and respected, a delicate balance in a world ruled by swords and decrees. Religion played a pivotal role as well. Elizabeth grew up Calvinist in a predominantly Catholic region, at a time when Protestantism was still regarded with suspicion by many. Hungary's religious landscape was fragmented, with Transylvania emerging as a rare haven of relative religious tolerance. Yet the shadow of the Church and the looming authority of the Holy Roman Empire always pressed upon the land. Elizabeth's faith, her intellect, and her gender would intersect in ways that shaped her later life, making her both a participant in and a target of the turbulent politics and culture around her. Elizabeth's early years, marked by intelligence, health struggles, exposure to violence, and intricate family politics, laid the groundwork for the woman she would become. A girl raised among dragons and myths, shields and towers, brutality and refinement. She was groomed to command, to survive, and perhaps unknowingly, to inherit the weight of both legend and suspicion. Yet even in this carefully controlled world of castle walls and noble tutors, rumors and shadows began to stir. Whispers of cruelty, of favoring some while punishing others, hinted at the dark impulses that would later envelop her life. As Elizabeth approached her adolescence, the stage was set. Political alliances would demand marriage, personal power would clash with family ambition, and the first hints of fear and fascination surrounding her character would begin to take shape, threatening to eclipse her youth, and eventually the very world around her. At the age of 10, Elizabeth Báthory was pledged to Count Ferenc II Nadasdy, a scion of another prominent Hungarian noble family. The marriage was less a matter of affection than of politics, a carefully calculated alliance to consolidate power and land. Tradition dictated that young brides be sent to the household of their future husbands to learn the ways of their new family, and Elizabeth traveled west to Castle Sárvár, near the Austrian border. There, amid the stone towers and timbered halls, she began the delicate art of navigating life as a noblewoman poised between the responsibilities of family, estate, and society. It was at Nadasdy Castle that Elizabeth first glimpsed the darker side of aristocratic power. Legends of punishment, cruelty, and dominance were not abstract stories here. They were lived realities. It is said that during her teenage years, a scandal arose. A relationship with a man of lower status allegedly produced a child. The tale, recorded decades later, tells of Count Nadasdy discovering the liaison and exacting horrific retribution, reportedly castrating the man and leaving him to a pack of hounds. The child, whether daughter or son, vanished. Contemporary letters from the period, however, praise Elizabeth's chastity and make no mention of such a transgression, leaving historians to wonder if the story was exaggerated or fabricated in the later obsession with her infamy. At 15, Elizabeth was married to Count Ferenc on May 8, 1575, in the palace of Ranov nad Toplo. in what is now eastern Slovakia. Unlike many young noblewomen, Elizabeth retained her family surname, Báthory de Exed, a subtle assertion of her lineage and the weight it carried. Her marriage produced several children, though many would die in infancy, a common tragedy of the era. Only three, Paul, Anna, and Catalin, reached adulthood, their upbringing entrusted to a governess while Elizabeth attended to the vast responsibilities of her estates. Her husband's role as a commander in the Ottoman Habsburg Wars meant that Elizabeth spent long periods alone, managing estates that stretched across Hungary. From 1578 onward, as Nadasti fought in campaigns against Ottoman forces, she oversaw agricultural production, defended property borders, and intervened on behalf of destitute widows and tenant families affected by war. Her correspondence and surviving records demonstrate a woman both competent and meticulous, able to navigate the complex network of obligations between landlords, tenants, and local authorities. Yet the same environment that demanded competence also exposed her to the violent norms of the time. Nadasti's military campaigns were ruthless, and tales of his treatment of Ottoman prisoners, including decapitations and grotesque desecrations, were well known. Some accounts later claimed that he taught Elizabeth the methods of torture he had perfected on the battlefield, instructing her in ways to punish disobedient servants or girls in her care. Whether these lessons fueled her later alleged crimes is impossible to prove, but they reveal the context of normalized brutality in which she lived. During her years at Nadasti Castle, Elizabeth maintained her role as a teacher and overseer for young women of the lesser gentry. The castle's gyneceum, a space designed for female education and household training, served as both a school and, according to later accusations, a site of torture. Young women learned etiquette, dance, needlecraft, and foreign languages, skills necessary to navigate Hungarian high society. Elizabeth, with her mastery of multiple tongues and her own aristocratic refinement, appeared the perfect instructor. Rumors began to circulate. Some whispered that girls in her care died under mysterious circumstances. Elizabeth initially blamed disease. Cholera and other illnesses were not uncommon, but the frequency of deaths and the appearance of strange injuries sowed seeds of suspicion. Her husband's presence shielded her from scrutiny. Yet it is clear that by the early 1600s, the combination of absentee husbands, isolated estates, and a noblewoman exercising absolute authority over her household set the stage for accusations that would later engulf her life. In 1604, Count Ferenc Nadasti died, leaving Elizabeth a widow at the age of 44. He had suffered for years from a debilitating leg condition, likely worsened by his military campaigns. His death shifted Elizabeth's position dramatically. No longer protected by his reputation and alliances, she became both the sole manager of the family estates and a potential target for political rivals. György Thurzó, Palatine of Hungary and representative of the monarch, would soon take an interest in her affairs, and the combination of her wealth, influence, and widowhood rendered her vulnerable to suspicion. Yet Elizabeth's widowhood was not a descent into chaos. Historical records show that she continued to manage her estates efficiently, protected her children's inheritance, and maintained correspondence with her influential relatives. She was a figure of authority and intellect, commanding respect and wielding power unusual for women of her time. Nevertheless, the rumors that had followed her quietly during her husband's life began to gather force, and a climate of fear and intrigue started to form around her reputation. The isolated castles, the distant heirs, the loyal yet fearful servants, all created a microcosm where legend and reality could intertwine. Elizabeth, the intelligent, multilingual, and politically savvy noblewoman, was now poised at the crossroads of personal autonomy and public suspicion. The whispers that had accompanied her since youth would soon escalate into a full-blown investigation. The world she had carefully managed was about to close in, and the stories of cruelty, whether rooted in fact or myth, would erupt into a scandal that transcended the walls of her estates. After the death of Count Nadasdy in 1604, Elizabeth Báthory's reputation, previously shielded by her husband's power and alliances, became increasingly vulnerable. Isolated in her castles, she continued to exercise authority over her estates and the young women under her supervision. Yet rumors, once faint whispers, began to spread like wildfire. Priests and local officials, previously compliant or indifferent, started questioning the mysterious frequency of deaths among the girls in Elizabeth's care. Central to the allegations was the Gyneceum, the women's quarters where unmarried girls of the lesser gentry came to learn the arts of nobility. By day, these girls were instructed in etiquette, dance, needlework, and languages. By some later accounts, by night they were subjected to unimaginable cruelty. Anna Darvulia, a servant who rose to become Elizabeth's confidant, was later accused of instructing Elizabeth in the methods of torture and teaching other servants how to participate. Testimonies claimed that Darvulia's arrival marked a turning point. Elizabeth, according to the accusers, became crueler and crueler, her punishments escalating in severity. The girls lured to the Gyneceum were said to have been drawn by promises of social advancement and education, an offer entirely plausible given Elizabeth's status and the region's customs. Once under her roof, however, some accounts suggest they became victims of starvation, physical punishment, and torture. Rumors described horrific acts. Young women left coated in honey to be stung by insects, limbs painfully twisted, needles inserted beneath nails, and other tortures extracted from medieval manuals of cruelty. Elizabeth allegedly enforced punishment with her own hands, sometimes aided by a black claw-like instrument, an eerie echo of her family's dragon legend. Yet it is crucial to note the context. Servants and tenants lived under strict hierarchies where violence was normalized and often legally sanctioned. Minor punishments, beatings for carelessness or disobedience, were common, and Elizabeth's methods, while allegedly cruel, must be viewed against the brutality tolerated in aristocratic households. Contemporary letters from the period reveal complaints about estate management, but contain no direct mention of systematic torture or mass murder during her husband's life. By 1602, after Nadasdy's prolonged absences, the deaths of girls at her Gyneceum could no longer be dismissed as coincidence or disease. Elizabeth reportedly prevented priests from inspecting bodies, allowing them only to see the faces of the deceased. This fueled suspicion, as church officials could not verify her claims of cholera or other natural causes. The combination of unexplained deaths, her absolute authority, and her isolated castles created fertile ground for scandal. Among the accused accomplices were Ilona Jo, the former wet nurse for Elizabeth's children, and her friend, Dorothea Sentes. Under torture, both women confessed to participating in crimes alongside Elizabeth, but these confessions were extracted through extreme duress. Fingers torn with red-hot pincers, and in both cases, death by burning. Another servant, Janos Uivari, was executed in a less brutal fashion due to his youth. Ersi Majorova, an elderly woman accused of directing Elizabeth to lure young girls, was given life imprisonment, illustrating the variability of punishment depending on perceived culpability. These accounts, while horrifying, are filtered through the prism of coercion and political ambition. Servants' confessions were unreliable, extracted under torture, and often inconsistent. Yet as testimonies proliferated, a narrative crystallized. Elizabeth Báthory, the Blood Countess, had allegedly lured, tortured, and murdered scores of young women. The figure of 650 victims, widely cited in later accounts, originates primarily from hearsay. One servant, Susanna, claimed a court official had seen the number in a private book, which was never produced in court. Most contemporary trial records suggest a smaller number, perhaps 50 to 60, though even this would mark her as unusually cruel for her era. Public curiosity and horror intensified as stories spread. Allegations reached the ears of Lutheran minister István Magyari, who denounced her publicly and took the matter to the Habsburg court in Vienna. Word of Elizabeth's supposed atrocities became unstoppable, amplified by letters, rumor, and a growing appetite for scandal in a society already familiar with tales of witchcraft and dark magic. Myths began to layer over reality. Tales of blood-bathing and vampiric youth enhancement would emerge decades later, obscuring the facts and ensuring that Elizabeth's legend outstripped her documented actions. Even Elizabeth herself attempted to navigate the mounting suspicion. She petitioned families of deceased girls to attest to natural causes of death, blamed her servants for acts beyond her control, and tried to maintain appearances of normalcy. But in a world where a widow controlled immense wealth and influence, rumors carried weight. The balance between truth, exaggeration, and political opportunism had tipped. The young noblewoman who had once mastered multiple languages, managed sprawling estates, and commanded respect now stood at the precipice of infamy. Her name, once a mark of heritage and intelligence, was becoming synonymous with cruelty, fear, and the grotesque. And while the full extent of her alleged crimes remained uncertain, the stage was set for an investigation that would draw in kings, palatines, and an entire region into the scandal surrounding the Blood Countess. By 1610, whispers of Elizabeth Báthory's alleged crimes could no longer be ignored. Priests on her estates, alarmed by the unusual frequency of young women's deaths, pressed for answers. Her power as a widow, managing vast estates and maintaining control over a network of subordinate gentry and servants, made her both influential and vulnerable. The escalating rumors caught the attention of György III, Palatine of Hungary and the king's representative, whose dual role as guardian of Elizabeth's young son and executor of royal authority would soon embroil him deeply in her fate. In October of 1610, Elizabeth retreated to the isolated Jeztha castle, Chaktica in modern Slovakia, nestled in the mountains roughly 50 miles from Bratislava. Likely anticipating the political storm to come, she may have believed the harsh winter roads would shield her from immediate arrest. Instead, Thurzo moved decisively. Letters and correspondence reveal that by December 30th, 1610, Elizabeth and 5 of her suspected accomplices, all servants, were formally arrested for torture and multiple murders spanning 2 decades, from 1590 to 1610. Contrary to sensationalized accounts, Elizabeth was not caught red-handed in a torture chamber. Contemporary letters indicate that she was detained while dining with guests. Yet Thurzo claimed publicly that he had discovered a girl dead and another alive, subjected to torment. No physical evidence was presented to corroborate this story. Some historians argue Thurzo may have deliberately exaggerated these claims to ensure public outrage and justify the arrest of a powerful widow whose wealth and influence posed a threat to both royal authority and his political ambitions. The ensuing trials relied heavily on witness testimonies, though most were second-hand. Out of hundreds of statements collected between 1610 and 1611, only 3 were first-hand accounts. 2 from court officials, Benedek Deseo and Jakob Silvasi, and 1 from a girl named Anna, who claimed to have suffered injuries. The court officials described traces of abuse, such as burns on hands, but did not link them conclusively to Elizabeth. The girl Anna received rewards for her testimony and changed her story multiple times, casting doubt on her reliability. Servants played a central role in the trials. Ilona Jo and Dorothea Sentes, both coerced under torture, confessed to complicity in alleged murders and torture sessions. Their confessions were extracted under unimaginable duress, fingers torn with red-hot pincers, followed by death by burning. Another servant, Janos Uivari, was executed in a less gruesome fashion due to his youth. Erzi Majorova, an elderly woman accused of luring girls, was sentenced to life imprisonment. The sixth, alleged accomplice, Anna Darvulia, Elizabeth's late confidant, was dead by the time of the arrests, yet servants implicated her as the originator of many torturous practices. These confessions, extracted through extreme cruelty, remain highly questionable by modern legal standards. Elizabeth herself never stood trial. As a noblewoman, she retained privileges that prevented her from facing open court proceedings. Instead, her son Paul and 2 sons-in-law, Nicola Zrinski and Georgi Drugeth, negotiated with Thurzo to safeguard the family estates. Letters between Zrinski and Thurzo reveal plans to confine her to a nunnery. Yet public outrage and political pressure led to the decision to place Elizabeth under strict house arrest at Szejda Castle. King Matthias II, eager to assert control over Transylvania and recover debts owed by the Báthory family, initially pushed for a full trial, but ultimately agreed to house arrest, balancing the political implications of punishing such a powerful widow. Financial and political motives are inseparable from the investigation. Count Nadasdy had lent large sums to the Habsburgs, and the cancellation of these debts after Elizabeth's arrest hints at an underlying incentive for royal authorities to remove her from power. Her estates, wealth, and influence in Transylvania posed a challenge to both Habsburg authority and local political stability. The investigation, therefore, was not purely a search for justice, but a complex interplay of money, power, and rivalry. Elizabeth attempted to defend herself. She petitioned families to testify that their daughters had died of natural causes and blamed servants for any acts of cruelty, claiming she feared them and could not control their sadism. She even suggested that some of the deaths might have been caused by the victims themselves, an assertion likely designed to deflect blame. Yet her efforts were insufficient to counter the mounting public perception of guilt, fueled by sensationalized testimonies and the political ambitions of her accusers. While the number of alleged victims ranges widely, from 50 in some trial accounts to the often cited 600, the lack of physical evidence and the reliance on coerced confessions render the true scale of her crimes uncertain. The blend of hearsay, rumor, and political manipulation has cast a long shadow over Elizabeth's legacy, leaving historians to grapple with the intersection of fact, fiction, and legend. Elizabeth Báthory, once a young noblewoman of exceptional education and poise, now faced the collapse of her world. Power, wealth, and autonomy had made her a formidable figure, but they also drew the full attention of those who could and would use the machinery of law, politics, and rumor to unseat her. The investigation had begun, The trials were underway, and the legend of the Blood Countess was about to be cemented in history, whether as fact, exaggeration, or a chilling mixture of both. Elizabeth Báthory spent the final years of her life confined within the walls of Széchle Castle, isolated from the world. She had once navigated with intelligence and authority. Accounts of her house arrest vary. Some claim she was bricked into a small chamber, yet others indicate she retained a private apartment with a small retinue of attendants. Whatever the precise conditions, it is clear that her freedom was severely curtailed, and the woman who had once managed vast estates and instructed the daughters of the gentry now lived in enforced solitude. During these years, Elizabeth continued to enjoy many comforts afforded by her wealth. Servants attended to her needs, and she maintained the privileges of her noble birth. Still, the confinement marked a dramatic fall from influence. Letters and reports suggest she occupied her time with routine activities, though her mind and reputation were trapped in a growing storm of rumor and scandal. The reality of her confinement, whether lonely or cushioned by luxury, stands in stark contrast to the monstrous image that history would soon construct. Elizabeth died on August 24th, 1614, aged 54, within the very castle that had become both her refuge and her prison. Her burial was initially in a local cemetery at Széchle, but uproar from villagers who feared a serial killer's grave led to the relocation of her remains. The precise location of her final resting place remains unknown. Speculation abounds. She may have been reinterred in the Báthory family crypt at Exed Castle, returned to her birthplace in Nayir Bátor, or buried in secrecy within the church precincts of Széchle Castle. In 1938, when a crypt in Széchle was opened, no remains were found, deepening the mystery of her final resting place. The immediate consequence of her death extended beyond burial mysteries. The Báthory family lost the repayment of substantial debts owed by King Matthias the Vaedicston, a sum that would never be recovered. While Elizabeth's children inherited estates and titles, the scandal permanently altered the family's reputation, casting a long shadow over subsequent generations. Yet even as history recorded her downfall, myth began to overshadow fact. The first written accounts of Elizabeth's alleged crimes appeared over a century after her death. In 1729, Jesuit scholar Laszlo Turoczi published Tragica Historia, introducing the sensational claim that Elizabeth bathed in the blood of young girls to preserve her youth. This story, originating among superstitious local peasants, was repeated and embellished by Hungarian historian Matthias Bell in 1742. Neither work relied on the trial records, and neither provided evidence for the most lurid claims. Nevertheless, the image of the Blood Countess took hold, entwined with fears of witchcraft, satanic influence, and unnatural female cruelty. The myth of Elizabeth's vampirism coincided with a wave of vampire hysteria in Eastern Europe during the 17th and 18th centuries. Folklore and fear of the supernatural were rampant, and stories of blood-drinking aristocrats fit seamlessly into the Gothic imagination. Later literary works, from Polidori's The Vampire, 1819, to Bram Stoker's Dracula, 1897, drew inspiration from the macabre legends of Eastern Europe, though Elizabeth herself is not directly referenced in Stoker's notes. Nonetheless, the connection between Transylvania, aristocracy, and bloodshed ensured that the Báthory myth would endure, perpetuated by literature, art, and popular fascination. As tales of vampirism, lesbianism, and occult practices flourished, Elizabeth's true history became increasingly obscured. The conflation of legend and fact created a caricature of a woman whose actual crimes, whether 50 or several hundred, were eclipsed by sensationalized myth. Modern historians continue to debate her guilt. Some argue she was a sadistic noblewoman who abused her power and perhaps murdered young girls. Others suggest she was a victim of conspiracy, targeted for her wealth, gender, and political influence. The lack of physical evidence, reliance on hearsay, and coercion of witnesses all complicate any definitive assessment. Despite the uncertainty, Elizabeth Báthory remains one of history's most infamous figures. Her story reflects the intersection of gender, power, and superstition in early modern Europe. It illuminates how a woman of intelligence and influence could be simultaneously respected, feared, and ultimately vilified. The Blood Countess, whether as villain or scapegoat, became a symbol of aristocratic excess, the dangers of isolation and unchecked power, and the enduring human fascination with horror and mystery. The castle walls that once sheltered her also imprisoned her legend. Elizabeth Báthory's life and alleged crimes continue to provoke debate. Was she a prolific murderer of 600 young women, or an unusually cruel but ultimately human noblewoman, caught in the politics and prejudices of her time? The line between fact and myth remains blurred, leaving her legacy as both a cautionary tale and a mirror reflecting society's fears and obsessions.